Welcome to Patty Sassano's midterm presentation, where we will discuss informal and formal assessment measures, including their differences and the pros and cons of each. So let's start with formal assessments. Formal assessment's purpose is to measure the overall achievement of a student, or sometimes to compare a student to other students of the same grade or the same age. Formal assessments are data-driven measurements, and they're usually standardized, although not always. There's often very strict testing procedures, which helps to ensure the reliability and validity of the testing outcomes. They tend to be designed by others, sometimes at a state level and national level, and examples include standardized test, norm reference test, and aptitude tests. So the pros of formal assessment include the fact that they are so data-rich. The data supports the conclusions from the tests, and the scores are presented mathematically, often with percentiles or stanines. The data provides adequate reliability and construct validity. The norm reference test allows those national comparisons for a broader picture. And the tests themselves can assess a broad domain of skills and achievements. The cons include that these tests tend to be prone to bias, particularly with our ethnically diverse students, and not all tests have alternate forms for these students. They're associated with high levels of stress, and they are a lag measurement. So let's move on now to informal assessments. The purpose of informal assessments is to measure student performance and progress, and sometimes to measure the effectiveness of a particular type of instruction for each student. It is content and performance driven as opposed to data driven, as we've seen with our formal assessments. It's usually criterion reference, and it's administered within the classroom processes. It's usually teacher designed, and examples include curriculum-based measurements, performance assessments, portfolios, error analysis, and checklists. Let's transition now to informal assessments. The purpose of informal assessments is to measure student performance, student progress, and sometimes teacher instruction. Informal assessments are content and performance driven as opposed to data driven. They are usually criterion reference, and they're taken within the classroom processes during classroom lessons. Informal assessments are usually teacher designed, and examples include curriculum-based measurements, performance assessments, portfolios, error analysis, and checklists. So now we move on to the pros and cons of informal assessments, beginning with the pros of informal assessments. These assessments tend to have less bias than the formal tests, in that there tend to be many alternative forms because we're testing one specific skill. That brings us to the next bullet point. Unlike the large domain of the formal assessments, informal assessments tend to focus on one skill, for example, reading fluency. And these skills are measured while the student is acquiring this particular skill. This formative nature gives us a lot of information that a formal assessment may not. These assessments tend to focus on prevention and early detection, and they support the RTI process, the response to intervention, and the three-tiered model that we're hoping to keep with that contemporary approach. The cons of informal assessments include that they are less reliable and valid than the formal assessments. They can lend themselves to teacher bias, since the teacher is the one giving the instruction and giving the assessment. And then there's limited class time to get probably all the information that the teachers may need for each particular student. So a quick summary of our formal and informal assessments shows the complementary nature of both types of assessments in the educational system. The formal assessment tends to be summative. The informal assessment tends to be formative. Formal assessments tend to be given less frequently, and informal assessments are done continually, weekly, sometimes daily. Formal assessments are data-driven, where informal are content and performance-driven. Formal assessments have the opportunity to test a large domain of skills, and informal focuses and hones in on one or two specific skills. Formal assessments offer us the option for the norm reference test to have comparisons to other students, sometimes on a national level, where informal gives us real-time data that we can use immediately. Because formal and informal assessments complement one another, educators should use both types to get an accurate picture of each student when monitoring progress and making educational decisions, such as eligibility for special education services if necessary. Thank you so much for listening to my midterm presentation. Have a great day.